The presentation today is called All About Chatbots. I am Alex Clark with Clark Management Consulting. Um, just get to presenter view so I can see my notes. There we go. Um, please try to remember to keep yourselves muted. Put questions in the chat, or there will be a Q&A session at the end. And yeah, let's dive into it. So um, first of all, what is a chatbot? A chatbot is a computer program that simulates human conversation like one that we might have with a live human being. The most common ways that you're going to encounter them are either voice virtual assistants like Siri or Alexa, or on websites. On websites, the format you will encounter them will usually look a little like a chat messenger window, like Facebook chat or Google chat. Um, You'll also encounter two other things on websites that kind of look like chatbots but aren't. One is actually live chat. With live chat, the user is actually talking to a human being and not a program. The other is a lead capture window. Basically, some very smart marketing people have figured out that a great way to entice people into filling out what is a glorified email contact form is to present them with something that looks and feels like a live chat window. So interactions with it will, and questions there will appear as chat bubbles. There may be a friendly looking face and name in the window that make it seem like there's going to be some kind of substantive interactivity, whether it's human or otherwise. But with the lead capture windows, there's no human intelligence there or even artificial intelligence. It is just a marketing trick. There's also some platforms that do legitimately blur and blend live chat, chatbot, and lead capture window systems. Um, Drift.com is one that blends these, and Communicate.io is another. They typically blend them with things like bot to human handoff. But for right now, we're just talking about chatbots, which are computer programs that simulate human conversation using conversational artificial intelligence technology. Um, so what really is artificial intelligence? There's first of all, there's artificial general intelligence, right? This is the ability of an intelligent agent to understand or learn any intellectual task that a human can. Um, as of right now, this is science fiction. You can think, if you want an example, you can think of like Data from Star Trek. Here's a great picture of two artificial general intelligence systems conversing. Another great example of general artificial intelligence from science fiction, and one that I think is closer to what the first general AI systems will actually look like, is the 2013 film Her, starring Joaquin Phoenix. Her is a sci-fi romance where the premise is that there's a new AI virtual assistant on the market that's able to learn, adapt, and evolve in the general AI sense. The reason I say that that movie was more realistic is that the AI isn't an android or a robot, but it's more believable and natural evolution of something like Siri or Alexa. The main human character is a professional writer who is depressed, undergoing divorce. He installs an AI system on his computer, thinking initially is just it'll be a professional assistant to help him with his work, but it evolves into a romantic relationship. And not to spoil the ending, but she continues to evolve as an intelligent being. Highly, highly recommend this movie. It won a whole bunch of awards. One of the classic tests for general artificial intelligence is the Turing test, named after Alan Turing. So in the Turing test, you have both a machine and a human conversing with a second human, and the second human has to evaluate which conversation partner is the machine. The idea being that if a human cannot tell the difference, then general AI can be said to be achieved. So yeah, Commander Data from Star Trek or the virtual assistant from Her, those would be examples of systems that would pass the Turing test. General AI is a real field of computer science research, but we're just nowhere near that yet. It's a kind of a holy grail for the future of humanity. Uh, then we have weak or narrow AI. This is your Siri, your Cortana, your Google Assistant, Alexa. These implement a limited part of a mind, although to say that they do that is very generous. What they really are is a very good pattern matcher and like syntax processor of English language. So instead of programming them with really rigid, like if-then type of rules, you train them on triggers, patterns, large bodies of text that contain back and forth conversations similar to the ones you want them to have. Weak or narrow AI is what virtual assistants and chatbots are built with. This technology is real. It's commercially available for next to nothing, commonplace, has real use cases in business and nonprofit world. We talked a little bit about kinds of AI, so I want to turn a little bit to some history. Eliza was probably the first chatbot. It was a conversational chatbot developed by Joseph Weizenbaum at MIT during the mid-1960s. It was not very sophisticated by today's standards, used pretty simple pattern matching and scripts to interact. Many people at MIT who had access to it were captivated by it and would spend hours talking to it. It was designed as a parody of certain styles of talk psychotherapy, where the therapist does a lot of repeating back the patient's assertions as questions. Today, if you're curious about ELIZA, the source code has been made available and has been re-implemented in other languages. So if you want to play with the original therapist chatbot ELIZA, you can either at, you can go to that address. This top one is a classic screenshot. This bottom one is from a snippet of conversation that I had with ELIZA in preparation for this webinar. My own personal history and fascination with chatbots started in the 1990s as a kid. In the pre-internet age, a special project at MIT was not something that much of America could become easily exposed to, and the internet wasn't really a thing in the early 90s either. But there was a company called Creative Labs who sold sound cards. It used to be that computers didn't necessarily have great abilities to play music, audio recordings, or synthesize artificial sound. And there was add-on hardware you could buy to do all that. So they sold a piece of add-on hardware called a Sound Blaster card. And they decided that a great way to show off the abilities of the Sound Blaster was to ship them with a ELIZA copycat called Dr. Spadeso, standing for Sound Blaster Artificial Intelligence Text-to-Speech Operator. So the way that it worked was it would type its responses out on the screen like that, but it also would speak responses aloud using a speech synthesizer. The original Dr. Spadeso is also available online if you kind of search around for like Dr. Spadeso emulator on Google. I spent hours talking to this thing as a kid, trying to figure out all how it worked and all the things it could say. And this screenshot here is from one of those emulators. Again, in preparation for this webinar, so you kind of get a sense of how it would attempt to converse with people. Evolution of artificial intelligence, natural language processing over the past 30 years in particular has been really dramatic, especially natural language processing. One of the most striking examples I can make is if you ever tried to use a automated translation service like Babelfish or Google Translate in the early 2000s, back then, those services were all based on dictionary or phrase-based translations, and they were really bad. In the 2010s, however, Google and other companies started switching to using something called a recurrent neural network. And the quality of these translations, the improvement was just incredible and very noticeable. Google Translate today is still, I would say, not appropriate for use in translating legal advice because of the nuance and complexity of legal concepts. However, it's very useful in other contexts like social conversations. And the images that I have here on the top is what Babelfish looked like around 1998. And the bottom is a graph kind of illustrating Google's claims about the quality of Google Translate now. And they're saying that the orange blocks is the like incremental improvement of a human translator over the machine. So if you look at like English and Spanish, there's almost no orange line at all. They're saying that's pretty close to perfect. And then if you look at English and Chinese, it's still pretty good, but there's a lot that a human can still add to those translations. Earlier this month, I think beginning of May, Google had a conference, IOCon 2022. They unveiled some real-time augmented reality translation glasses. Just astonishing. They showed a video of allowing two people who speak different languages to have a face-to-face conversation in real time by reading translated text displayed within their glasses. So this is the type of thing that is kind of cutting edge of artificial intelligence and natural language processing. So again, to kind of recap where we are, we're talking about AI. We talked about general AGI, and then within there we also have the weak or narrow AI, which is where natural language processing, transcription, translation, grammar, and part of speech parsing and natural language understanding falls in. And what natural language understanding is this is your pattern matching, sentiment analysis, context, intent analysis. It still can't truly understand, like in really the philosophical sense of what it means to understand something. Like a computer system never really can understand what what a gentle summer breeze feels like, right? But what it can do is it can process 1,000 different ways that somebody might ask what the weather is outside. You can say, what's the weather? How is the weather? Will it be nice outside today? And you can train these systems to respond appropriately. Some use cases of natural language understanding in chatbots. So they make possible having like a really friendly format interaction, meeting people where they are. It's potentially helpful, especially with people who have undergone trauma or have skills-based barriers or just preferences that make navigating a traditional website for information less than ideal for them. So one example, in Thailand, the police investigator, I think his name is Pibram Mekhaniant, was working on a domestic violence case. He initiated a chatbot project called MySys to help victims of gender-based violence, especially domestic violence, by providing emergency support, legal and action-based knowledge, links to various support services, like a nonprofit support call center, police, family court resources. That successful project has been supported and featured by the Thailand Institute of Justice, the Thai Health Promotion Foundation, UNICEF, and UN Women and more. Another example is Vivian, is a ID theft crime chatbot used for helping when people have experienced identity theft or maybe business-related crime, cyber attack, and helping them respond. There's also a couple that my company has built, and those are the screenshots above, Gem and Moose chatbots. These are general website navigation and question and answer bots. Gem additionally contains a deep dive logic branch that helps people identify fair housing issues and navigates them to a sophisticated guided form system. So think like TurboTax for disability and domestic violence housing reasonable accommodation requests. These are approachable, friendly systems. They have cute little avatars, and sometimes that alone makes them more useful and friendlier. One thing that people sometimes ask me or wonder is what the benefit is of using a bot to present people the same content that is already on their website. I think that there's a few answers to that. One is human psychology. These cute little bots, sometimes with smiling faces, are enticing and friendly looking, much more so than an overwhelming and large website. They meet people where they are. A lot of people just prefer to talk to somebody, even if they know that somebody is fake. Sometimes, especially about embarrassing or difficult topics, it may even be preferable to talk to a bot over a real person. It can really honestly be a simply superior design and user experience when we're talking about ease of use and human-centered processes. Not everybody easily navigates websites. Every website on the internet has its own navigation structure, first of all. And while many websites have search features, oftentimes these search features are not very tolerant of spelling issues. And of course, they can't understand what somebody is, really looking for the way that a natural language understanding system can be trained to do. So if somebody doesn't know the right word to search for, what keywords to use, they're not going to find what they're looking for with search. So here's an example from a legal aid website. I searched for getting kicked out of my apartment on this website and nothing came up. I also searched for, they said I have to leave my apartment, and I searched for landlord kicking me out and nothing came up. And I tried this on a few different legal aid websites. Some were a little bit better, but none of them were really great. And I got a lot of like nothing found, no results, because I had to search for the magic word of eviction in order to bring up like the most responsive resources. Um, Same experiment, yeah, can be on all kinds of websites, different areas of law. And that's really because search is a very low sophistication way, based on appearance of keywords in both the search phrase and the index pages on the website of helping people find content. So natural language understanding and chatbots are just can be a lot better with helping people find what they're actually looking for. Um, Chatbots are good for answering the kind of basic questions businesses and organizations get asked constantly, like what are your hours or how much do your services cost? How do I apply for your services? What kind of cases do you help with? Do you help with divorce? Things like that. Many of these questions can be answered on a website, but in my experience, legal aid organizations still get a ton of them. People will try to ask those questions by email, phone, Facebook Messenger, if your business has a Facebook page. Sometimes people get really irritated too if they receive no response for an extended period of time. Chatbots provide an additional relief valve for those types of basic questions about services. They can respond to those questions 24/7. With Idaho Legal Aid, for example, we actually connected their website navigation chatbot Gem to their organization Facebook page, to their Facebook Messenger account. Um, and so now they're able to be more responsive to those types of inquiries. Pine Tree, where the Moose chatbot was set up, they have multiple offices that handle their own intake with no centralized hotline and no online intake. So the question of what office to contact to apply for services can be pretty hard to figure out and understand from their website. So for Pine Tree, we built a geographic deep dive into their chatbot. So people asking about how to apply are able to engage in a short back and forth conversation with the bot about like, hey, what county do you live in or what city do you live in? And then it responds with just the information that they're looking for about what number to call, what office, and its hours. Um, Finally, chatbots can be a more natural as well as more sophisticated way to do screenings for appropriateness of self-help resources. So instead of giving somebody a long form paragraphs of instructions about when to use or not use a legal form you provide on your website, you can ask a series of yes/no questions. This is kind of similar to systems like A to J Author that present guided interviews and can have screening sequences in those guided interviews. It's just a different format, a different interaction format, and you can build these types of screening sequences into a system that can do other natural language understanding tasks. And this is, again, something that simple search just cannot do. Let's talk about types of chatbots. So one type is a user-trained or a mass text ingestion chatbot. So these bots basically, they're not really configured that much by their administrators or designers on specific tasks or specific sequences. Instead, they're trained by processing just huge amounts of conversation or other text um, from humans, and they try to just respond in the same way. Sometimes there will be feedback loops built in. So, if the bot responded in a way that makes sense, somebody could click like or good or something to say that this was a good response. Um, Microsoft tried this in 2016 with a public Twitter bot called Tay. Um, so it was a Twitter account that would interact with the general public, um, and it was all artificial intelligence powered. If you have spent much time on Twitter, you might be able to guess what happened, which is the bot quickly began behaving the way that Twitter behaves as a whole. It had to be shut down in less than 24 hours because of the racist, anti-Semitic, and violent things that Twitter taught it to say. There's also a universe of low quality bots that are mostly based around button navigation rather than natural language. These are uh, honestly kind of more of a gimmick or useful for capturing email addresses for sales follow-up. Here's a couple examples of a more limited like button-based or lead capture system called Drift. So with Drift here, in this exchange, what happened was uh, I looked at the suggested questions that it gave, and then I just typed one out of how much does Drift cost. And because I typed it out, it went to what's called a fallback response. It didn't actually answer my question because it didn't even understand that because I typed it out instead of clicking a button. And I had to actually click the button to get it to respond with that. We have a few different plans that you can use. Here's another example with Drift. I asked it a variation of one of its suggested questions. I said, how can people use Drift instead of asking, how can I use Drift? And it again gave me a fallback response. I had to actually click the how can I use Drift button in order to get um, the response that was actually specifically for that question. This is one that I've seen within the legal aid community, the Help for TN bot by LawDroid. It can only do a couple things. It has two buttons, fill out forms and search site. The search site feature actually just performs a site search using the same method that the search bar does. So it came back with like the first link was advanced medical directives and healthcare agents, and my landlord won't make repairs. What should I do? And those are exactly in the same order. Those are the same responses you get if you just search the site. So it is presenting the same search results without using any natural language understanding. And the other thing it does, if you're curious, the fill out forms button, it gives you 5 links for forms resource websites. 3 of them are the same website, the Family Champion website. There's also a like Worker Champion and a like Tenant Champion website. And those links just go to the front page of those websites. So the advantage of this is that it still is like really friendly and really attractive and highlights something that might help people get to what they're looking for, but it's not really using any natural language understanding and it's not conversational. Um, there's kind of a handful of major players in terms of commercially available natural language chatbots out there. There's some other ones out there that are less well known. Many of them use one of these under the hood, although not all of them. Most are very low cost. Dialogflow by Google, for example, has a very generous free tier with both the Moose project and the Gem project. We've never gone beyond the free tier, and these are production public facing systems. IBM Watson also has a free tier. Amazon Lex has 12 months free, and then the cost after that is less than a penny per request, which is like per statement by either the human or the bot. There's also Oracle Digital Assistant. That one's really expensive. It's like $4,000 per month. And then there's Microsoft Power Virtual Agents, which is about $200 a month. Where these systems really shine is with answering basic questions, helping people find information, and with simple guided navigation style screenings for appropriateness of resources. Few concepts, if you're interested in ever building these, there's just a few basic concepts that are really important to understand. So the first one is an intent, and it has a couple different meanings. The first one, in kind of the pure sense, is it's the user's intended meaning. It's what the user is trying to say. The other meaning is in some platforms, in particular Google Dialogflow, the page where you configure an intent and configure all the details of how it should react when it's determining somebody's intent and how it should determine it. They call that page an intent. So it could be a little bit confusing because it's like, are we talking about intent as a concept, or are we talking about intent as this specific page in the system where you interact with it? Triggers are keywords or phrases that correspond to an intent. You want to make sure you don't have overlap where the same phrase or keyword corresponds to different intents, or the bot might not pick up the right one. During initial development, these triggers and phrases are developed by Chatbot developer in partnership with the customer organization. But later on, as you go through the history of people, of public actually interacting with the system, you can use their real statements and queries to further refine and develop the triggers. Contexts are input and output connections between intents. These link intents together into hierarchy, and they give a conversation structure so there can be a natural back and forth. Slot filling is a feature for collecting information like a phone number or a name and storing it for use again later. It could be used in a conversation, like if you want the bot to like ask somebody their name and then later on address them by their name in the conversation, or it could be used to collect information to be sent to an external system, which is what a fulfillment is. So fulfillment is what Google calls it. Other platforms call it different things, but basically, if you want some information about where somebody is in a conversation, maybe the information that's been collected to be sent out to a third-party computer system for further processing, you would set it up with a fulfillment. Fallbacks are responses that the bot will use when it doesn't understand, when it couldn't match what the user said to a intent. These can be context specific. Commonly, they should be configured with a limit. So if you hit the fallback 2 or 3 times, the context just gets cleared, conversation starts from the base level. And ideally provide the user some more guidance about how to ask questions that the bot will actually understand. So this slide and the preceding one are the basic concepts you need to understand to build chatbots. If you can understand those concepts and follow a few best practice rules and have a bit of comfort with technical topics and with technology, you can build a chatbot. Let's talk about some limitations. So a big one actually is confusion with a human. So this is one that I do see in logs with my bots. Even though people are always warned at the beginning of a conversation that they're talking to a chatbot and not to a human, sometimes people miss that and they end up getting frustrated because the bot does not respond. They would respond the way that they would expect a human to respond. For example, I'll see stuff like, "I'm sorry, can you just call me instead? My number is," and then they give their phone number. Or I see, "Hey, I keep trying to call you, but nobody's answering at your office." Things like that kind of imply that the person doesn't understand that they're talking to a computer system. Another issue is with depth, specificity, and complexity. So the longer a conversation goes on, the more likely it is that something will come up that the bot won't handle properly. This does tend to limit how many levels deep or how many turns a conversation can have. There are ways to address bot confusion, specifically with the fallback responses that I mentioned before, to just tell the user to simplify or rephrase. Sometimes this works and sometimes it doesn't. And this can be frustrating for users when they're asked repeatedly to rephrase or repeat. So again, typically I try to put a limit on how many times people will get a please rephrase before they are just either kicked out of the context, or the other thing that I do is I'll give people a clickable menu to pick from of things that the bot actually can understand. Another drawback is I talked about that slot filling feature earlier. In practice, at least with Dialogflow platform, slot filling does not always work very well. So what I found is that if the slot filling feature has validation built into it to make sure that the user entered data that looks the way that it would expect. So if a phone number was asked for, then it'll be 10 digits. Or if a zip code was asked for, it'll be a 5-digit number. What I found in particular with names and less common names is that it gets confused if a name doesn't look like a name, a human name that it's seen before. And if it doesn't feel like the response from the human exactly can be fit into a slot, and it will keep asking the question over and over again. I am investigating whether other platforms like IBM Watson or Amazon Lex might do a better job of slot filling than Google's solution does. But I have not had a chance yet to fully research the alternatives. Other integration options. So if we're talking about integrating onto a website, basic integration techniques for websites, it's going to work in just about any website platform, so long as your organization does have full administrative control over your website, including the ability to add a small code snippet to the site-wide footer for your website. We've integrated Dialogflow successfully with WordPress, Drupal for legal aid websites, as well as static pages. All of them work basically the same way. You have to be able to copy paste a couple lines of code in the right place. Beyond that basic level of integration, there are different ways you can go. One might be related to passing information to another system or giving a user a link to take them to the right part of another system that they've been screened into. So for example, with Idaho Legal Aid's chatbot, we use the bot to determine what type of disability accommodation someone needs, whether they need a service animal, a wheelchair ramp, issues, help with the way that they're communicated with, and then we hand them off to the right. It'll be a variant of an automated form in DocAssemble for that specific type of disability. Another example might be where you want certain things to happen on the underlying website page that someone is on, like instead of just linking somebody to a page, you might link them to the page and then scroll to and highlight the right section. So these aren't out of the box integrations, but they are all possible. And chances are, if you have an idea of something you want to connect a chatbot to, it can probably be done. If you are interested in human handoff options, that's another category of integrations. So depending on the system used, you might have some options for handing off a chatbot conversation to humans. So the screenshots on this slide above are both from a system called Communicate, and it shows on the left the way that an early version of the Moose chatbot was tested out, integrating with Communicate. So this would allow human employees to monitor the website conversations and then jump into the conversation if they want to. And then on the right is a screenshot showing all the different platforms that Communicate supports integration with. So they support Dialogflow, Amazon Lex, Watson, and a couple others. There's also bot copy. Bot copy is another kind of value-added service that'll go over the top of different those different major open platforms, and they do more in the way of facilitating more connections to human handoff options. IBM Watson supports several human handoffs out of the box. So they have integrations available with Salesforce Chat, Zendesk Chat, as well as Twilio Flex. I don't think we've talked about it yet in this webinar, but Dialogflow and probably the others as well also typically have voice interfaces available. So instead of interacting with a chatbot over like embedded in a web page, it might be a phone number that you call. What that might look like would be something like connecting like your centralized intake hotline number to Dialogflow, letting people describe their legal issue in their own words, and letting the AI system identify your legal issue and then routing them to a specific point within your phone system. So the screenshots above are from a service called Vox Implant. And Vox Implant, what they specialize is connecting Dialogflow to traditional telephone PBX systems. Another thing, and then another thing you can think about doing is having like a after hours number for canned advice. So like 24/7, people could call a phone number, describe a legal issue that they're having, and then it will give them some canned advice about tenant rights or domestic violence protection orders or something like that. Analytics. So I'm about to show you next few slides some screenshots of some analytics dashboards that look fairly visually sophisticated and attractive. But in full disclosure, I have to mention that in practice, these are not as easy to use as they may look, especially Dialogflow. So here's one showing like percentages of which intents were identified. Here's some graphs. The reason why you see it go up and down in that pattern, obviously, is because more people use these websites during the day than they do in the middle of the night. It's a daily graph. This is another couple ways that it shows summaries of what intents were identified, what issues were the bot talked to people about. I have ended up developing a tool on my own actually for Dialogflow logs to do a better job of processing them, because what I found is that even though these look really nice, it's not very easy to answer the types of questions that oftentimes grant funders want to know for like a grant reporting cycle, like just a simple, how many times did the bot help people with a housing issue, things like that. So I developed an additional tool to just kind of output everything to a spreadsheet that's easier to work with. Another thing I need to talk about, people should be aware of, is accessibility. So in the general sense, these web messengers that are text-based, screen readers should do a fine job of reading out their text. In practice, I have found some issues. I was recently made aware that there's a problem with keyboard navigation on Dialogflow Messenger. Like you cannot use tab and space and enter to navigate to the chat window and open it. I have a ticket open with Google about it. I'm meeting with a support engineer from Google tomorrow afternoon to talk about the ticket. And I also have a preliminary workaround. Basically, it involves the chat window starting open in open form already. But I just have to disclose to people that there is an issue with dialog flows out of the box chatbot window. Uh, IBM Watson Assistant works really well. I tried it with a screen reader and keyboard navigation. Amazon Lex was pretty bad, honestly. Um, but keep in mind, I was just testing with Google, IBM, and Amazon's own chat widgets, and there are third-party chat widgets out there like Communicate and Bot Copy, which are likely better. So there is an accessibility issue here, although it's not an insurmountable one, and it's not an issue that's fundamental to the technology of chatbots itself either. What about other natural language understanding systems? Um, this goes way back to actually the 1760s. So there's something called a naive Bayes classifier, which is an approach to using statistics to place sample text and therefore kind of the intent of a writer into categories. It has all kinds, the Bayes theorem is what it's based on. It has all kinds of applications in statistics, linguistics, sociology. The place where you've probably run into it before is firsthand is spam filters. It's one of the oldest ways to detect spam going back to the mid 90s. Typically, it uses a bag of words approach. So the appearance of certain words in a message will indicate either greater or lesser likelihood that a message is spam or not spam. The same algorithm could be used to classify a text as, let's say, a question about landlord-tenant law or a question about family law. And users can train the bag of words model over time by marking content as spam or not spam or identifying the area of law or whatever. Suffolk Law School has a system called SPOT, legal issue classifier, that is getting better all the time. It is trained originally on data from the legal advice subreddit, and the classification was done using an online game called Learned Hands, where volunteer law students and attorneys provided the training to the AI model to tell it how to classify those posts from Reddit. In preparation for this webinar, I tried out their test tool, and it did a really good job of identifying my first inquiry. I said, I'm getting kicked out of my apartment, and it identified that as a housing issue. I tried a couple variations of a domestic violence inquiry. I tried my boyfriend hit me, I need a PO, a couple others, and it had a really hard time. Although one of my dialogue flow chatbots identified DV issues very easily. The reason that I suspect this happens is because of a really common issue with AI systems generally, which is that the text that it's trained on needs to be similar to the text that it's trying to understand. So Spot is trained on really long paragraph length, like narrative descriptions, almost like stories sometimes. So it doesn't perform as well on really short texts. And conversely, the bots that I build in Dialogflow work really well with short text, and they work really poorly with long text. And that'll invoke if you try to send it like 10 sentences long story of something that happened to you, it's just going to come back with a fallback response and tell you to please rephrase in a more simple way. So these are both good systems, and Spot is an awesome example of what AI can do in the legal field. And the key is just make sure that you're using the right AI system for the right task. Another natural language understanding system that's been in the works for a number of years, Microsoft And a couple legal aid organizations in Alaska and Hawaii have been working on a system called legalnav.org. The vision behind that platform is that it can be a centralized portal to help people triage their legal issues with personalized plans, routing them to legal service providers and other resources. One of the early features of LegalNav was an artificial intelligence text classification system using Microsoft Lewis. The source code from that version is open source and public. They have since switched to Spot, but it's still very interesting to see the Lewis model. So what you see on this screen is a listing out of in machine readable format of the various intents that it could identify, various areas of law. And then here's a screenshot of a section of some of the training text that was used for the Microsoft Lewis model. So you can see things like, I got an eviction notice, what should I do? I got laid off from my job. So again, they've since switched to Spot, but it's still interesting. So here's an image showing Spot in action on legalnav.org. So I tried searching for debt collectors keep calling me, and LegalNav using the Spot API identified that as either a disaster relief topic or a money debt and consumer issue. So I think that is pretty good. LegalNav, Spot, spam filters, these are all examples of natural language understanding technologies as text classifiers. They're just not conversational AI. It's always just one round of interaction. So you send text to it and then it sends you back what it thinks is a legal issue. And that's about the end of the interaction. If you are interested in replicating and working with the systems that I've developed in partnership with Pine Tree and Idaho Legal Aid, that piece is open source. So for the most part, platforms like that these are built on, like Dialogflow and Watson, they're proprietary to Google and IBM, but open source licensing of my own work product is something that I felt very strongly about for about 20 years. And so it's public on GitHub. We do generally charge for our labor in new projects. So if you want to work with me on a replication, usually those fall between the $6,000 and $10,000 range. Significant new development projects fall between 25 to 50,000. That being said, I do want to show you just how easy it is to get started with replicating one of these bots and also do a bit of a demo. So I'm going to come over here and show you just how easy it is. So first of all, this is the GitHub page, and the first thing you would do if you wanted to replicate would be download, say, the moose.zip. Download that zip file, and I come into the Dialogflow Essentials console. I need to create new agent. We call it webinar demo. Takes a minute. Save. A couple seconds to think. There we go. So by default, it'll have like a welcome intent and a default fallback intent, and that's all that's in there. That's all that's built out. So what you do is you come to the settings, you go export and import, and then you can import from zip. Select that moose and import. And one thing to be aware of when you import is it overwrites everything. So don't build out like a few branches first and then do an import because you'll lose what you built out. So I import, done, go back to my intents. And now I've got all of the content for Moose. Now, if I want to deploy this onto a website, I'll show you a very, very simple example of what that might look like. So first of all, I need to go to integrations, come down to Dialogflow Messenger, and enable, and it'll give me this little snippet. This is that two-line code snippet I mentioned earlier. I am going to, first of all, grab some just boilerplate HTML to make the simplest web page possible. Copy that, come down here into the body, webinar demo, come down here into the body, grab this again, copy it, paste, save this back here in a folder. Call it index.html. All right. I'm going to come over here to Netlify, which is a service that makes it very easy to launch really simple little websites like this. I'm going to upload the demo. Give it a minute for this to change. There we go. And here we go. Here's my chatbot. This is a replication of this. It's just that fast. So now I can ask it questions like, do you help with divorce? And it says, hey, that sounds like family law. I can say yes. It gives me family law resources. I can say, are your services free? Gives me, actually, didn't understand that. I'll have to look into that because it should have matched if it still had to pay anything. Anyway, you see the idea. So I know not everybody is comfortable with stuff like this, but hopefully you get the idea that it took me about a minute or two of copy pasting to get it going. And then after getting it going, the other thing that you need to do a replication or modifications, you need to come through to all of the intents, and everywhere that you know, the payloads are not right because they are linking to Pine Tree's website, and responses that are specific to Pine Tree, you need to change all of that text, change all of those links. And there is also a let's go back to the presentation for a minute. Let's go back. Wrong slide, I was near the end. Back to that link. This botflow.com payload samples, this is a resource that helps you write the custom responses. You can write plain text responses too, but if you want to include like links or suggested responses, this helps you do that slightly more complicated style of response. That is all that I really wanted to get through and share with you all today. What questions do you all have? Everybody's muted, everybody's shy. If you don't have any questions, we can also open it up to ideas or brainstorming. If anybody wants to share, like, hey, do you think a chatbot could be used for this? Or I was thinking this could be cool. Those are also things happy to talk about if anybody wants to throw anything out there. Well, we're pretty quiet bunch today. but oh, I see Melissa says, I think this looks terrific. Karen says, did you mention a specific legal aid organization that uses chatbots as part of its intake system? No, there isn't a specific one that uses it, except in the sense of, um, both Idaho um, and Pine Tree provide information about, they just provide information and links within the chat, like, hey, click here. Like Idaho, they have legal server online intake. So there is a way that you can get to, if you ask about how to apply, it'll give them the link to the legal server online intake. The experiment that I tried with online intake was actually with Pica. CMS. I tried using the slot filling feature to collect like it was like name, phone number, and email address. And while it did work, what I found is it worked on names like Alex Clark and George Washington, but it did not work as well on other names that are maybe less common. And I thought that that was really not great from a diversity inclusion perspective. And so that's something that I think would need more investigation and refinement if organizations actually want to collect information in chatbot format. But it's something that's possible. I think it's just I didn't have great luck with it when I was experimenting. I see Arlene is writing a message as well. So I'll wait for her comment. I think what else I wanted to share with you all while I'm waiting. Arlene, stop typing. Oh, I see. Oh, great question. Um, so uh, what we did for what I've done for chatbot projects that I've worked with is I've tried to, just because of the scope of those particular, let me get out of this slideshow. So I do have an intent. Where is it? Other languages. So I have an intent which is meant to identify if somebody is trying to maybe access in another language. So it's picking up on names of other languages, and they respond with basically a sorry, here's how to translate this site, and also a screenshot showing like where to click to get the website in another language. I did this with Moose just because of the scope and nature and size of that project. However, chatbots can be developed and set up to be multilingual. So the way that you do that is, so right here, let me get back to the intents. I can add additional languages, and you can do more build out in additional languages. So, so I guess short answer is yes, it's possible. I just haven't done uh, uh, a complete multilingual project before. Melissa has asked, how much work is it to have this chatbot be a guide to the whole site? So that's what we did for Idaho and Pine Tree, is that it does appear everywhere and helps navigate people and find resources across the entire site. It doesn't necessarily navigate people to every single page and every single resource specifically, just because it's kind of hard to drill down that specifically sometimes to what people need, because as you know, talking to people, talking to clients on the phone, meeting with clients, they don't necessarily understand exactly what page or resource we need. So like for the most part, what we designed these to do is to go to the high level, um, like kind of umbrella pages. So there's just a family law intent that takes people to, like, for example, um, on Pine Tree, the high level page is about divorce, custody, and family. Um, Not to say that we couldn't identify as a divorce, custody, and family, and then drill down further into figuring out, is this divorce? Is this adoption? Is this, whatever? But that is just how far we've gone with these particular projects, is we kind of go to this top level of categories. And on Idaho's website, we go to, where is it? Topics. We kind of go to this level, um, and maybe like a little bit deeper, like one level down on certain topics. Great question. Um, any other questions before we wrap this up? Well, I appreciate all of your time. Again, feel free to reach out. You can either reach out to me by email, or you can schedule a time on either causebot.ai, has more information specifically about chatbots, or the general page for my business is Clark Management Consulting, or you can also email or call me directly. But these pages have links to my meeting scheduling tools, if you just want to get something on the calendar and talk. Yeah, I love chatbots. I think it's a great technology. It's a ton of fun to work with. I think it offers a lot of value. So there we go. Thanks, everybody. And have a great rest of your afternoon.